Chapter 1. The End of Days. Cloudsdale crumbles. The day the world ended started off just another normal day, or as normal as Equestria and wartime allowed it. As I stated before, I worked as a simple mariner before the war. I didn't change much during the war itself. I didn't want anything to do with the fighting, if I could help it. Instead, I started up my own delivery company, appropriately named Ditzy Deliveries. It was hectic work, given the nature of the world at the time. However, it didn't have the merit of being a simple, honest labor. That said, it would have been naive of me to think that I could escape the war. It consumed the entire world, and no pony had the luxury of falling outside its reach. The vast majority of my business during the later years of the war came from the ministry of Princess Luna's government. Even prior to the formation of the ministries, I did a lot of work for the military. My presence in the city of Cloudsdale on the day the megaspells destroyed Equestria was actually a bit of a fluke. The day before the apocalypse, I received a message from the Ministry of Peace hub located in the Cloud capital. They had large shipments of medical supplies needed to be delivered, but all their regular couriers were otherwise occupied. As a result, they contacted any other Pegasus delivery service they could reach. I arrived in Cloudsdale early that morning. The sun was just barely above the horizon when I touched down with my wagon in the Ministry of Peace hub loading bay. A number of other Pegasi were there as well, having been called in much the same manner as me. I smiled and waved a few of them, although most of them seemed more intent on getting the job done. If they were anything like me, they would have their hooves full of work as it was. I added a load was not entirely welcome. I wasn't about to complain, though. The MOP always worked good for every pony, up until the end. They tried to help as many ponies as they could. I entered the MOP facility, the rear entrance off the loading bay. From there, I followed a few other Pegasi down the narrow hallway leading to a reception area. We waited there as the secretary behind the counter called out to us by name of our various delivery companies. I ended up waiting there for about an hour before I was called up. I was equal parts worried about the need of all supplies, and glad to be part of the delivery. I walked up to the counter. Another Pegasi called at the same time, accompanying me. I don't remember her very well, but I do remember that she smiled at me. She seemed too glad to be of what help she could. I smiled back before directing my attention to the secretary and the invoice she placed in front of me. It listed the items we'll be delivering and where we would be delivering them to. Curiously, I glanced over at the invoice given to the other Pegasus mare. The list on it was nearly identical to mine. 2 crates of Rataway Potion, 2 crates of regular healing potion, 1 case of extra strength restoration potion, and 1 case of Med-X brand painkiller. Her shipment was headed towards Huffington. My invoice had all the items that were listed on hers, but it also had one that was not. The assembly of private footlockers. I glanced at the location I was delivering the goods to. Canterlot. Specifically, the Canterlot MOP hub on the Ministry Walk. After double-checking the invoice, I picked up my pencil in my teeth and signed the paper with my name and trademark. That mark was 7 bubbles floating upwards, identical to my cutie mark adorned on my flank. After signing the invoice, I returned to the loading bay where I found a pair of Pegasus bucks loading the crates into my wagon. Both were grumbling about the extra work, but I didn't begrudge them for it. I saw the same Pegasus I had been in the counter with walk past me to her own wagon, waiting for the MOP bucks to finish loading my wagon. I watched she expertly strapped herself into the wagon's harness and took off. Had I known what would soon come to pass, I might have asked her name. After 2 stallions finished loading the larger crates, a unicorn mare, wearing a Ministry of Peace nurse's dress, walked out over to my wagon. A soft glow enveloped her hooves, enchanting them as she granted the ability to walk on the clouds, a trait normally exclusive to Pegasi ponies. Her horn alight with magic, and a field of levitation surrounded a footlocker that floated alongside her. It too bore the colors of the Ministry of Peace. The unicorn stepped into my wagon and secured the footlocker at the back, directly beneath a small safe that I had not kept records and invoices in. I also had a simple bottle of Sparkle Cola Rat in there at times, but that was not really important. With the footlocker secured, the unicorn stepped out of my wagon and turned to leave. Before she did so, she shot me a look that suggested the contents of the locker were worth more than my small delivery business entirely. She departed, leaving me feeling a little sheepish. I closed the latch to the back of my wagon shut after confirming that it was secure. I flew around to the harness at the front of my wagon. I hovered in place as I took the straps in my teeth and latched myself to the harness. Once I made sure I was strapped in nice and tight, I gave a firm flap of my wings and we began to pull out of the loading bay. My departure from Cloudsdale was uneventful. I was able to pass the security checkpoint out of the city fairly quickly by informing them that I was making a delivery from one of the ministries. The fact that it was heading for Canterlot, notwithstanding, everybody tried to minimize friction as much as they could when the ministries were involved. I was relieved as the increased security was often responsible for shipments arriving late, both for and from me. As well, had I begun to help up any longer, I might not even be here right now writing. Although the Ministry of Peace shipments would have normally taken priority, I had a small package that needed to be delivered to Ironshot Firearms Factory in the Community of Hope. It was the opposite direction to Canterlot, but it was a fair deal closer to Cloudsdale than the Equestrian capital. I headed westward out of the cloudy city, hoping I could drop the package quickly, and then reach Canterlot before midday. I was flying over a long valley on either side of the mountain, Cloudsdale not far behind me. A large billboard depicted Fluttershy holding up a sparkle cola, sticking it out from the mountainside. She seemed particularly happy to be holding the cola bottle. Although I never had been a big soda drinker myself, I smiled while looking at it. It reminded me so briefly of the time when a new type of sparkling carrot beverage was the biggest thing in the news. As I looked at the billboard, my eyes drifted on its own accord, settling on another billboard half a mile down the valley on the opposite side. This one was a typical military banner showing Pegasus soldiers laying waste to wicked-drawn zebras, better wiped than striped. I had seen his billboard before. I still hated it. I was briefly acquainted with a rather nice zebra who lived near Ponyville, and I didn't like the idea of her being lumped with the others, less reputable for examples of their kind. Put up a second billboard, I began to move down the valley, intending to put it behind me as soon as I could. In that same instant, the end of days was upon me. Everything I ever known was gone forever. Even though I was facing away from the city at the time, despite my lazy eye and impaired vision, the mega explosion destroyed the city of Cloudsdale. It was plainly visible to me. A great flash of putrid green light flared up behind me and reflected on the surface of the mountains and stretching out along the valley before me. On instinct, I turned on the spot to see where it was. I was momentarily blinded by the intensity of the sickly green flames with their spectral sheen and looked away. In the moment that I looked back, I had seen silhouettes of the few other Pegasus-drawn carts and wagons standing out again in the flash. Moments later, I felt a rush of heat. That I knew would be coming from the massive explosion. The intensity of the heat spiked rapidly, and I began to spiral downward, heat sapping my strength. I flapped my wings as hard as I could to attempt to level out, but it was no use. Less than 20 seconds after that I started, I was struck by a wave of pressure caused by the explosion of the force, the mega detonation. I thought I could hear screams sounding out from behind me, carried by the echo of the mountain that lined the valley. It didn't last, as the pressure wave blew out my ears in a deafening crash. The last thing I remember was the ground rapidly coming up to greet me in the darkness. I awoke to the sensation of rain falling on my face, though the first thing was to come back to me. It was immediately swallowed by intense pain, my head pounding unbearably. I couldn't move either of my forelegs, and my stomach was doing the cartwheels. Before doing anything else, I vomited. The taste of bile only added to my symptoms. I'm fairly certain the act of vomiting alone caused me to do so the second time. A second later. I was not the most well-versed in magical radiation, but I knew enough to understand I was in trouble. With what I had been my breakfast now spilled over and charred grass underneath me, I took a moment to look at myself over. My head was still throbbing, but my stomach had settled down at a touch. I could see that I was still strapped to the harness of my wagon. I had crashed into the ground hard, and both my forelegs were broken and bleeding out of numerous gashes. I looked back and saw my wings, mercifully, were still intact. A bit of the release of my shot in my harness, freeing myself from the mangled frame. As soon as I was loose, I flapped my wings and got as high into the air as I could, without sending my stomach in a hard reeling. It was just barely high enough to keep my weight off my broken forelegs. Trying not to think about my legs. Instead, I focused on what concentration I could muster on my wagon. It was a sturdy thing. It had survived the crash, largely intact. It had sunk into the ground slightly, and the roof card had caved in over one corner. But it was otherwise fine. The impact had thrown the door open, spilling numerous crates out in the back. I made my way back around the back of the wagon, trying to keep myself from passing out again. One of the broken crates behind was a shipment of rat-away potions. Some of the packets had burst, spilling out the amber-colored liquid and blackened ash grass. I stretched out my neck, not wanting to touch down to pick up the packet, and grasped one of my teeth in it. I hoisted up, turning my head upwards. It bit into my bag, allowing the contents to spill down my throat. A lot went down my face, muzzling as well, but the rain washed it off. Had I known it become of me, I might have saved the pack for some pony who actually needed it. I repeated the process, consuming rat-away potions 3 at a time. I didn't know if it was enough, but I had regained some of my lucidity. My concentration improved. I tried to get my bearings. I didn't know how long I had been out, nor exactly what happened. I looked at the sky, hoping to see a sun for a measure of how long it had been out. All I saw was an endless sheet of gray clouds. The sensation of the rain continued to make me feel a little foolish. Another thing I could no longer see was Cloudsdale, even though it would be normally visible from a distance. In a flash, I realized I remember the scream. I had heard it right before I crashed. I looked down the valley and I saw a wreck of another skywagon, a little less than a mile behind my own crash site. I grabbed another packet and brought away in my teeth and flew towards it. I arrived there a lot more quickly than I figured I should have, and I moved to check the Pegasus still strapped to the harness. She was dead, the rear half of her body scorched black and almost her hair burnt off. It wasn't too much. I let out a scream, dropping my potion packet as I did so. My head swarmed with the scent of her burnt corpse reaching my nose. My insides lurched and I vomited again. Thankfully, not on the recent deceased mare. I found myself crying, tears blurring my vision. I'd cried for the mare who had died so horribly. I'd cried for myself, my insides feeling so many different kinds of wrong. Lastly, I cried for Cloudsdale, as the realization struck me. The explosion had come from the city, which I assured was no more. I awoke a few minutes later, not realizing until then I had blacked out once more. I was still in a truly dreadful amount of pain, but it had ebbed slightly. This was not good, as I knew the full well the severity of my injuries. The fact was I was laying on my broken forelegs, but I could not feel them. Stirred something within me. I glanced back at the dead Pegasus mare. Despite being light-headed, knew that I did not want to end up like her. I wanted to survive. I wanted to find out more of what happened, and above all else, I wanted to make sure that the rest of Equestria was all right. I struggled to make my wings work, my lifeless forelegs dragging against the ground as I skittered back towards my own wagon. I nudged over the bent door out of my way, eyeing the inside. Everything had toppled over, most of the crates cracking and breaking open. Several healing potions lay shattered on the floor. Thankfully, a hoofle were still intact. I grabbed one in my teeth, and I downed it greedily. I knew that it was risky given my legs were broken, but I'd rather be alive and crippled than bleeding to death. The gashes on my leg mended by the time I finished drinking a second healing potion, although I was still unable to make them move. Satisfied, though not thrilled. I grabbed a pair of saddlebags with my cutie mark emblazoned on them, and then from the midst of the wreckage, I turned them over, dumping the contents already onto the messy wagon floor. Once empty, I filled one of the pouches with the bottles of healing potions that hadn't broken. Only one of them were super restoration potion. The other jars which had shattered. I filled the other pack with as much rat-away as I could cram from the crate outside. Despite my burst of survival-driven adrenaline, I was still on the verge of blacking out. Although I had mended the gashes in my leg, I still had lost a lot of blood, and the pain of broken bones beneath was like 1,000 of tiny daggers. The only thing keeping me from losing consciousness again was my small, insistent voice in my head. For some reason, I figured it was my will to survive, and it was telling me that I needed to let myself back out for the third time. I would not wake up again. The image of the other Pegasus burned to death and lying in the motionless in her harness filled through my mind. Ignoring the cries of protest from my ailing body, I forced my wings to move. They flapped slowly but surely, lifting me a few inches off the ground. I wanted to tuck my forelegs under me to keep them from hitting the ground, but of course they couldn't move the way I wanted them, so I mangled them as they were. Undeterred, I began to move again. I headed towards the end of the valley, as the direction seemed to be less taxing on me. As well as I head up the valley would only take me back to Cloudsdale, which was no longer there. I'm not sure how long I flew, although I know I wasn't moving very quickly, as I had a clear view of the sun, no watch or timepiece. I had no idea how much time had passed. I didn't know that by the time I had exited the valley, the light filtering through the cloud ceiling was beginning to wane, marking the onset of the evening. At least the rain had stopped for now. I was unfamiliar with the area and now was normally flying over the area with a little heed for the ground-based landmarks. The terrain was relatively flat, and I could see the farmhouse of a silo in the distance, hoping to find some pony there. I began to head towards them. The throbbing in my head was back, and my focus was slipping. My forelegs had gone completely numb, and the inside of me felt like they were liquefying. I drew closer to the farm and almost thought I could hear some pony shouting. A flash of light shot up into the air from the field of the farm, almost like a distress flare, in the dying daylight. I couldn't see very far, but the flare illuminated a figure galloping towards me from the farmhouse. There was a soft glow atop her head, suggesting that there had been responsible for a flare. Considering that they were still a quarter-mile away, she must have very good eyesight. Inspired by the seemingly friendly presence, I was able to push myself to hover up towards the farm a little faster. The other ponies ran towards me, meeting me halfway to the farmhouse. When she stopped in front of me, I was able to see that she was a unicorn. Her coat a pale green color, and her mane was auburn streaked with orange. I wanted to raise a hoof in greeting and say something unfriendly. What I did was black out for the third time and final time. Footnote: Ditzy's special. Strength 5, Perception 4, Endurance 6, Charisma 6, Intelligence 5, Agility 6, Luck 8. Current status: Initial stage of ghoulification.